Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, you're no one particularly important, which in this case is exactly the point. You're not a statesman, not a poet laureate, not even someone with a decent hat. You're just you, a quiet soul with ink on your cuffs, a few centimes in your pocket, and the entire day ahead of you, in a smoky little Parisian café that smells like burnt sugar and spilled philosophy. The year is somewhere in the latter half of the 19th century. The hour is early, and for once there's nothing pressing to do but sit, sip something hot, and watch the city yawn itself awake around you. Before we settle in, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your little corner of the world. I love seeing who's tuning into the show, and if you enjoy this kind of quiet journey through time, there's a link to the Patreon in the description where you can get early access, ad-free audio, and more. But for now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. The streets of Paris are still asleep when you arrive. The gas lamps along the boulevard flicker lazily, as if unsure whether to keep burning or give up for the day. Somewhere far off, a cart creaks, its wooden wheels sighing over cobblestones. But here, on this little side street that smells faintly of river fog and coal smoke, the only sound is the clink of a key turning in a lock. The cafe's heavy shutters groan open on hinges older than some countries. The owner, a round, balding man, with the moustache of a retired duellist and the eyes of a man who hasn't slept past dawn in 20 years, nods at you once and disappears inside. He doesn't ask why you're here so early. This is Paris. People sit in cafes for all sorts of reasons. Heartbreak, poetry, bread, sometimes all three at once. You step through the doorway into air that's still thick with yesterday. There's the faintest trace of tobacco clinging to the curtains, and the sweet sour scent of last night's wine still lingers in the corners. But there's something else too, a freshness trying to fight its way in. The sharp edge of morning, the promise of heat from the iron stove, the first slow breath of the day, stretching and blinking. A broom scrapes across the tiles, dust dances in the shaft of light that filters through the open shutters. It's not quite clean in here, not yet, but it will be, soon enough. The cafe itself is nothing grand, no gold trim, no velvet booths, no marble busts or sweeping mirrors. Just a scattering of mismatched wooden tables, all of them bearing the marks of past conversations. Ink stains, coffee rings, a heart carved into one corner. Rather optimistically, beside the initials, M+M. The walls are painted the shade of old parchment and chipped in places where a chair leg has been kicked back too many times. There's a fireplace that works only when it wants to, and a narrow counter behind which the owner has begun rattling tin pots like a percussionist, warming up for a very small, very caffeinated orchestra. It's still dim inside, not dark exactly, but the kind of grey that makes everything feel muffled. A few candles are lit, out of habit rather than necessity, and their flames bend gently with each draught from the door. On the far wall, a faded clock ticks with soft defiance, its hands always a little late, as though it too resents the urgency of modern time. The tables are bare for now, but you know what's coming. The folded napkins, the chipped porcelain cups with mismatched saucers, the small spoon placed just so. There is a ritual to it, not a pretentious one, but something sacred in its own quiet way. This cafe may not be listed in the guidebooks, not yet at least, but it is beloved by those who need it, which is to say, almost everyone. You choose a seat by the window, though the view at the moment is more fog than city. Outside, the dawn is just beginning to turn the rooftops, a gentle rose grey, and a lone chimney sends up a curl of smoke, as if Paris herself is sighing. A few carriages pass, wheels clattering, horses blinking against the cold. A paper boy stumbles by, muttering to himself, one sock falling slowly down his calf. And then, perfectly on cue, the goose arrives. It doesn't belong to the cafe. Or perhaps it does in the way that certain animals come to belong to places without ever signing anything official. The goose is large, white, and walks with a sort of purpose usually reserved for generals and retired opera singers. It pauses at the door, eyes you briefly, then continues on its way down the street without so much as a honk. The owner doesn't seem surprised. He merely nods and returns to slicing bread with the casual violence of a man who has done it 1,000 times. That bread, by the way, is one of the reasons people come here. Not because it's the best in the city, though it might be, but because it's real. Baked in the tiny brick oven, tucked behind the kitchen wall, it arrives in uneven loaves, crust crackling and flour still clinging to its edges. When the first slice is dropped into the toaster contraption, really just a wire rack near the stove, the cafe begins to smell like something between a bakery and a memory. There's butter too, pale and soft, with specks of salt that sparkle when they catch the morning light. You watch as a pat melts into the toast with theatrical slowness. No one's in a hurry here, even the butter knows that. From behind the counter, the owner sets a battered copper kettle on the stove. It whistles half-heartedly, then builds into a proper shriek, like a diva being reminded of her cue. He pours the hot water over coarsely ground coffee, stirred with a spoon that's been worn thin in the middle from decades of stirring. There's no espresso machine here. No menu with foreign adjectives. Just coffee, strong, dark, and served in a thick mug that makes you feel, however briefly, like a philosopher. And then it happens, that moment. The one you didn't expect, though perhaps you were waiting for it all along. A shard of sunlight finds its way through the dusty window pane, slips past the curtains, and lands squarely in your lap. The dust in the air, caught in that golden beam, turns into a slow-motion snowfall. You watch a single mote spin, dip, and catch the light like it's been rehearsing all night for this. It's just dust, of course, just light. But in that moment, it feels like grace. No one else is here yet. Just you, the owner, and the comforting sounds of a place remembering how to exist. A floorboard creaks, the kettle groans, a fly investigates the sugar bowl with a laziness that mirrors your own. The chairs sit empty, waiting for conversations. There's no music, unless you count the rhythmic knock of the broom against the baseboards or the occasional sigh from the stovepipe. You close your eyes for a moment and listen, really listen, and find that the silence has layers, soft, breathable, and filled with potential. You could leave, of course. You could go somewhere more fashionable, more crowded, more modern. But why would you? This cafe with its slightly crooked doorway, and its goose-shaped mascot, and its coffee that tastes a bit like history, has everything you need. A place to sit, a cup to warm your hands, a moment that belongs only to now. And if that's not worth savouring, what is? The clock ticks on. Outside, the city begins to stir in earnest. Footsteps, clattering wheels, the bark of a street dog, chasing something invisible. But in here, time drips slowly, like syrup on warm bread. You lean back in your chair. The owner refills your mug without asking. The light grows stronger. The day has begun, gently. And you, lucky you, are exactly where you're meant to be. The cafe doesn't so much fill as it settles into itself. As the gas lamps outside are dimmed and the sun begins to stretch properly across the boulevard, the door opens with a soft jingle, and the first of the regulars shuffles in. You don't need to ask their names, not because they're famous, but because they belong here. In the way certain chairs creak just so, or particular floorboards always know to groan under a certain step. Their faces are lived in, their coats weathered, and their orders known by heart. First is the painter, a tall man with ink-stained cuffs and a jacket that may once have been fashionable during the reign of Napoleon III. He doesn't carry a canvas, not today, but his fingers are already speckled with indigo and vermilion, and he leaves faint smudges on the doorframe without noticing. He nods to the owner, selects the table nearest the stove, and unwraps a hard little roll from his coat pocket, as if unveiling a relic. He doesn't speak. He stares at the wall with the slow, deliberate intensity of someone imagining how it might look upside down, or underwater, or full of ghosts. This is considered normal. Next is the seamstress. She's younger, but only just, her hair tied in a hasty knot, and her skirt hem slightly damp from walking through morning puddles. She carries a basket full of fabric, pins, and what appears to be a half-finished doll with no face. She always takes the table near the window. The light is better there, she says, and orders coffee with just enough milk to change the colour, but not the taste. Her fingers move constantly, even when she isn't sewing, as though the thread continues in her thoughts. She hums, off-key but quietly, and occasionally lets out a sharp, surprised laugh at something she reads in the paper. And then comes the man who claims to have met Victor Hugo. This assertion is made daily, and always with subtle variations. Sometimes it was at a dinner, sometimes at a funeral, once at a fencing exhibition involving chickens. No one ever verifies the details, but no one objects either. He has the moustache of a man who would lie about meeting Victor Hugo, and the coat of someone who once considered becoming a poet, but instead became loud. He brings his own newspaper, folded into thirds with surgical precision, and he always borrows a spoon, then forgets to return it. There is, by now, a drawer behind the counter labelled simply, his spoons. The rituals begin. Coffee arrives in warm porcelain cups, the glaze just starting to craze around the rims. Sugar cubes are placed in tiny bowls shaped like seashells. The painter dips his roll into his coffee. The seamstress arranges her basket like a miniature storefront. The Victor Hugo enthusiast begins reading aloud from the editorial section with the tone of a man announcing a royal decree. Outside, pigeons flutter onto the windowsill, peering inside with the disapproval of unpaid critics. The spoons clink. Always the spoons. Not loudly, not annoyingly, but with the steady rhythm of civilization itself. It's a sound that makes everything else possible. Conversation, contemplation, digestion. One man stirs too long, lost in thought. Another taps his spoon 3 times before setting it down. It's not superstition, it's just how mornings go. Conversations begin to hum through the cafe like threads on a loom. Not all of them are about politics, but most of them find their way there eventually. The debates are light, circuitous, more theatre than argument. A man in a bowler hat insists that the railway will bring nothing but moral decay. The painter counters that moral decay is already here, and at least the train will be on time. Someone compares the emperor's latest policies to a pastry, too flaky, not enough filling. No one writes this down, but someone probably should. There's no real tension, no shouting, no broken glasses, no fists on tables. Just the rising and falling of words, like waves against a breakwater. It's understood that no minds will be changed here. That's not the point. The point is to say something clever before the coffee gets cold, and to make your neighbour laugh hard enough to spill his drink. The seamstress, who rarely speaks during these debates, offers the occasional needle-sharp comment that cuts straight through the bluster. She has, on more than one occasion, silenced a room with nothing but a raised eyebrow. Not everyone talks. A few sit quietly, reading, writing, listening. One man near the door is sketching his fellow patrons with charcoal on the back of an unpaid bill. He adds a small pair of wings to the Victor Hugo man, though whether they're angelic or avian is unclear. Another guest, a woman with a green scarf and a chipped front tooth, peels an orange with such focus it becomes a kind of meditation. The peel comes away in a perfect spiral, and she holds it up in triumph before placing it on her saucer, like an offering. And then comes the moment of wonder. It's quiet at first, just the sound of a chair being drawn back and the gentle clack of a walking stick against the floor. The cafe stills slightly, as the elderly gentleman arrives. He is a fixture here, older than the mirrors, older, possibly, than Paris itself. He wears a coat with velvet cuffs and carries a small flask of something that smells faintly like lost summers. He orders his usual absinthe, though the cafe technically isn't supposed to serve it before noon, and retrieves a single sugar cube from a tin in his breast pocket. He places the cube on a slotted spoon and holds it delicately over the glass. Then, with great care, he recites a poem to it. Not about the sugar cube, to it. No one is quite sure if the poem is original or borrowed, but it always rhymes and it always involves the moon. When he finishes, he lowers the cube into the absinthe with the reverence of a priest placing a relic on the altar. The drink blooms into a soft, cloudy green. He sips. The cafe exhales again. By now, the tables are mostly full. There's a dog asleep under someone's chair. No one's quite sure who brought it. A delivery boy has dropped off a basket of eggs and stayed for a glass of milk and a pastry. The owner moves among the tables like a gardener, topping off cups, adjusting the crooked frames on the walls, occasionally muttering to the sugar bowls as though they've disappointed him again. You, seated in your same spot by the window, are now simply part of the scenery. No one questions your presence. You belong because you're here. Outside, the light has shifted from gold to cream, and the sounds of the street are louder now. Shopkeepers opening shutters, horses snorting at traffic, a boy hawking chestnuts from a metal cart. But inside, the cafe maintains its own weather. It is insulated from the hour, cradled in a rhythm that knows nothing of appointments or deadlines. There is no rush. There is only now. Someone sneezes, someone laughs. The painter finally speaks, saying only, "I think the sky is less blue than it was yesterday." No one responds, but several people nod, as if this is exactly the kind of observation they were waiting for. You take another sip of your coffee. It's cooled slightly, but it still tastes of roasted beans and long conversations. The newspaper lies open on the next table, ink smudged where a hand once rested. A fly investigates a jam jar. The goose, briefly visible through the window, appears to be scolding a pigeon for sitting in her spot. The morning continues, soft, warm, absurd in the best way. The cafe, having carried its little burst of morning bustle with pride, now settles into something quieter. Not empty, never quite empty, but soft around the edges, like a coat that's been worn into the shape of its owner. The last of the early patrons have gone off to do whatever it is people in Paris do before lunch. Paint, mend, argue, loaf. What remains is a quiet kind of residue. Half-finished thoughts, the scent of toast, a few forgotten umbrellas leaning patiently near the door. The chairs creak more now, their little aches no longer drowned out by laughter or debate. A man 2 tables down has fallen asleep, his head tipped back against the wall, mouth slightly open, a breadcrumb on his lapel like an epaulet. No one wakes him. There's an unspoken agreement in this cafe that sleep is sacred, especially mid-morning sleep. If anything, he's earned it. A woman scribbles into a notebook, pausing occasionally to chew the end of her pencil and stare at the middle distance, as though trying to remember a word that keeps slipping away. A waiter in a slightly too tight vest wipes down a counter while humming off key, a wobbly little tune that sounds suspiciously like the national anthem, only somehow about 2 notes removed from recognizability. Outside, the day continues, but it feels far away, like a painting seen through several panes of warped glass. Inside, the silence isn't absolute, but it hums. The kind of hum that only old spaces know how to make. Floorboards shift. The old tin clock ticks unevenly. A spoon clinks gently against a saucer as someone stirs, not for flavour, but for rhythm. And somewhere behind the kitchen curtain, a kettle lets out a short sigh, as if remembering something faintly embarrassing from long ago. You sink into your chair with a different kind of comfort now. Not the anticipatory sort that comes with fresh coffee and a brightening sky, but the deep, slow ease of having nowhere else to be. The air is warmer. Your second cup of coffee sits cooling beside you, half forgotten, and your coat, folded neatly over the back of the chair, still carries the faint scent of firewood and steam. Cafes in Paris are not just places to eat or drink. They are something in between, a third place. Not home, not work, but something else entirely. They are waiting rooms for ideas, for daydreams, for human weather. They are shelters for people between errands, between jobs, between lives. Some people come to be alone, safely surrounded by others. Some people come to be seen and ignored in equal measure. It's entirely possible to sit here for hours without speaking, without being spoken to, and still feel completely understood. There is a kind of anonymity that's not lonely. That's what the cafe offers. You are not important here, and that's exactly why you're welcome. No one expects anything from you beyond the polite orbit of your saucer and cup. You may read, you may write, you may stare out the window and think about nothing or everything, or that dream you had where your landlord turned into a cabbage and tried to charge you rent in song. The cafe does not judge. The woman with the notebook gets up and leaves her table momentarily, perhaps to visit the washroom or consult the waiter about the day's tart options. She leaves her notebook open, and beside it, a folded sheet of paper with an envelope addressed in tidy blue script. You aren't trying to pry, but you can't help but glance over. The envelope reads simply, Paris, and nothing more. No street, no name. Just the letter, like a breath. The letter itself, still partially unfolded, sits beneath her now empty coffee cup. You blink. A drop of moisture from the cup's bottom has spread across the page, just a little. Not a ruin, just enough to blur the corner of a word. As you watch, the ink begins to bloom. It happens slowly, the way flowers open in time-lapse films. A curve of a letter unfurls into a wider stain, its edges feathering out like the wings of a moth. It's a mistake, perhaps, but a beautiful one, a kind of spontaneous art, the kind that only paper, time, and accidents can create. For a moment, it's all you see, the pale cream of the paper, the dark breathing spread of the ink, the curve of handwriting that was meant to be secret, now just slightly surrendered to the room. And then the woman returns unaware. She folds the letter quickly, neatly, and slides it into the envelope, smoothing it once with her palm before tucking it away. No one speaks. The moment passes but lingers, as such things tend to do. In the corner, someone begins sketching. Not a masterpiece, not even a proper portrait. Just the curve of a sugar bowl, the lean of a chair leg. Each line is hesitant but thoughtful, like the artist is asking permission from the object before committing it to paper. It's a rhythm you've seen before. Observe, pause, capture. Outside, the clouds part briefly, and a shaft of light filters in through the smudged window, landing on the floor beside your table like a stray cat. It stays for a while, then slinks away when no one's looking. You look around and realise how still everything has become. The man is still asleep. The humming waiter has moved on to polishing glasses. The cafe seems to be exhaling, letting out the breath it held during the morning rush. The clamour has dissolved into little gestures, a yawn behind a handkerchief, a knuckle cracked discreetly beneath the table, a saucer rotated 3 times before a spoon is laid upon it like a crown. Even the goose is gone, or perhaps simply taking her mid-morning constitutional somewhere further down the street. There is a pigeon on the windowsill now, pecking idly at a crumb someone forgot. It peers inside, fluffs its feathers, and turns its back to the room with theatrical disinterest. You briefly consider that the pigeon might be writing a review of the cafe in its own way. Everything in this hour feels suspended, like the city hit pause, not in a grand operatic sense, but in the quiet way time sometimes folds in on itself during late mornings. You sip your coffee again, even though it's gone cool, and let the flavour linger on your tongue. A little bitter, a little smoky. You think you taste cinnamon, but it could also be dust. It hardly matters. The taste is of here. You have become part of the furniture now. Not unnoticed, but unremarkable, in the best sense. You exist in the corner of people's awareness like the ticking of the clock or the scent of bread. Not essential, but expected. If you left suddenly, someone might glance up. They might miss you. They might not. But for now, your presence adds something to the room. A little weight in the air, a little warmth in the arrangement of chairs. There is no pressure to stay. And yet, you do. Not because you're waiting for something to happen, but because things are already happening in ways too subtle to disturb. The scratch of a pen, the soft clatter of a fork being rearranged on a plate, the minute adjustment of a hat tilted too far forward. Everything is both ordinary and precise, like a clockwork mechanism designed only to mark the passage of very quiet joys. Outside, the city pulses on, faster, louder, more insistent. But here, within these four walls, and their comfortably uneven plaster, the cafe remains a sanctuary. Not sacred, not solemn, just safe. Safe for dreams, for drift, for words written and unsent, for coffee that's a little too strong, and chairs that lean to one side, and spoons that were never part of a matching set. You feel content, unrushed, undisturbed, entirely at peace, just long enough to forget what time it is. By the time the bells in the distance begin marking the noon hour, the cafe has already started to transform. The hush of mid-morning gives way to something richer, louder, hungrier. Chairs scrape back from tables as the room begins to refill. Not all at once, but steadily, like water rising in a shallow tide. The smell of roasted meat creeps in from the kitchen, mingling with butter, pepper, a faint trail of garlic, and the permanent undercurrent of coffee and dust. The air grows humid with conversation and steam from the stove. Condensation beads on the windows, turning the city beyond into a watercolour painting in progress. Lunch here is not so much served as it is performed. The first course arrives with the clatter of crockery, a potato soup poured into wide bowls, its surface glistening with a swirl of cream and the barest suggestion of chives. It's hearty, but not heavy, warming the belly and the bones, without making anyone sleepy. This is followed by a parade of little plates, sardines dressed in oil and lemon, slivers of beetroot that stain the porcelain, crusts of bread rubbed with garlic and topped with pale anchovies that blink slightly in the light. A waiter carries a tray of boiled eggs and mustard with the solemnity of a priest bearing relics. The wine makes its entrance shortly after, uncorked with a low, satisfying sigh. It's a local red, and nothing expensive, but deeply aromatic, with notes of plum, dirt, and perhaps something like ink. One man claims it smells like a library, and no one disagrees. Glasses are filled and refilled, some carefully, some generously. It's understood that anyone still drinking coffee at this hour must be either in love or in debt, and in either case sympathy is extended. Someone orders cider, someone else orders nothing at all and simply takes a piece of bread, tears it in half, and eats it slowly, as though it might tell them a secret. Conversations swell to meet the moment. There's more laughter now, more gesturing, more elbows accidentally knocking over cutlery. The topics bounce and spiral. Theatre, politics, the price of pears at the Rue Mouffetard market, the scandal involving a professor who ran off with a soprano and 3 mismatched suitcases. It's hard to know which stories are true and which have been polished into better versions of themselves over time, but no one minds. The truth here is less important than the telling. At the corner table near the window, a visiting actor has taken up temporary residence. You can tell he's an actor because no one else speaks with quite that much resonance, or flourishes their napkin like a magician about to make it disappear. He's in town for a production of Les Fourberies de Scapin, or perhaps Tartuffe, the specific shift depending on who's asking. He orders with flair, eats with gusto, and punctuates each anecdote with a sweep of his hand. During one particularly vivid reenactment involving a jealous director and an unfortunate stage curtain, he knocks over a carafe of water, sending it cascading across the table in an arc of glistening chaos. For a moment the café freezes, then applause. Not sarcastic, not cruel, but delighted. Someone throws a folded napkin, like a rose, onto the stage of his stained tablecloth. The actor bows deeply from his seat, dabs at the water with his cuff, and carries on without missing a beat. The café doesn't punish drama, it invites it, especially if it comes with good timing and the promise of dessert. Other conversations continue in more subdued tones, whispered, conspiratorial, the kind that lean close and glance sideways. A young couple shares a plate of soft cheese and a pile of bread, speaking in low voices and laughing into their sleeves. A pair of elderly women sit by the stove, knitting between bites of sausage and murmuring about someone named Agnès, who is apparently taken up with a man who owns far too many pigeons. The details are vague, but the judgment is clear. Near the counter, two men debate loudly over the merits of different street performers, arguing whether the fire eater on the Pont Neuf is more talented than the one who juggles flaming violins by the Seine. It's impossible to tell whether they're serious. It's equally impossible to look away. Every table becomes a stage, every voice part of the score. The waiter spins between them like a dancer, balancing plates and refilling glasses with the smooth precision of someone who has long since accepted chaos as a colleague rather than a threat. He wears an apron that has seen better decades and a pencil behind his ear that's never used. When someone tries to wave him over with too much urgency, he pauses, raises one eyebrow, and then resumes his pace exactly as it was, unchanged, unhurried, unimpressed. And then, amid all this colour and noise, comes a moment that silences the room in the gentlest way. A woman near the centre of the café, quiet until now, wrapped in a shawl patterned like faded ivy, rises from her seat. Without saying a word, she opens her umbrella. Indoors. No rain, no excuse, no explanation. It unfurls with a slow whoosh, revealing a painted night sky stretched across the inner fabric. Deep blue, nearly black, speckled with stars rendered in tiny, shimmering silver dots. A crescent moon arcs over one panel, so delicate it seems almost to move when the umbrella turns. No one laughs, no one objects. Instead, for a full 20 seconds, the entire cafe watches as she slowly turns the umbrella once, then closes it again with the same graceful care. She places it beside her chair and resumes eating her lentil stew as if nothing had happened. Someone claps, someone else wipes their eyes. A third person, inspired beyond reason, begins sketching constellations into the butter on their bread. This is what lunch in this cafe becomes, part sustenance, part theatre, part quiet rebellion against the outside world. You eat slowly, letting each bite linger. The bread is still warm. The butter is saltier than you remember in the best possible way. You find yourself listening to the fragments of conversation around you, even when you don't quite follow. The sound of so many voices, each with its own rhythm, creates a kind of music, one you didn't know you missed until now. The cafe is brighter than it was in the morning. The windows are fogged with breath and steam, their corners trickling with condensation. From your seat, the city outside appears hazy, as though viewed from beneath the surface of a lake. A waiter wipes one pane with a cloth, leaving a streaked oval that reveals a man across the street trying to carry a basket of baguettes while also fending off a particularly aggressive crow. Inside, a child sneezes into a napkin and is promptly awarded a grape from their neighbour's plate. The actor tells a story about a hat that caused a duel. The umbrella stays folded and quiet, like a secret waiting to be reopened. The plates are cleared, but slowly. This isn't the sort of cafe that hurries you out with the bill. The waiter brings the check only when asked, and sometimes not even then. People linger. They lean back. They sigh. They loosen scarves and tilt their chairs just slightly. The universal sign for I'm not leaving yet, but I will eventually. The mood is soft around the edges now. Not sleepy, but full. Like the end of a good chapter. You sip the last of your wine, now slightly warmer than ideal, and watch a pair of crumbs drift down your plate, like they're trying to escape unnoticed. The painter from earlier has returned and is doodling something onto a napkin. You think it's a fish smoking a pipe, but it's hard to tell. Someone begins humming again, low and tuneless. The sound blends with the clatter of dishes and the rhythmic tapping of a cane against the floor. Lunch is not over. Not really. In this cafe, it simply dissolves into afternoon. A gentle transition, like mist melting into sunlight. The afternoon drapes itself across the cafe like a heavy shawl. The lunch plates have been cleared, the wine glasses rinsed and flipped, and the laughter that once rattled the spoons has softened into the occasional sigh. Outside, the city carries on. Boots strike cobblestones, carts rattle over bridges, and somewhere a dog is barking about something very important. But in here, none of that seems to matter. The cafe has entered a kind of stillness, not quite silence, but a suspended quiet. The light fades slightly as the sun shifts behind a chimney, taking on that golden buttery hue that makes even dust look holy. Ambition thins in this hour. People are no longer trying to impress or perform or explain. They read or pretend to read. They lean on elbows. They stare into cups of coffee, the way fortune tellers might examine a crystal ball. Across the room, a man flips through a newspaper without turning a single page. A woman fans herself with a folded menu, even though the air is neither hot nor moving. Someone nearby lets out a sigh so deep it seems to come from an entirely different century. Under your chair there is a cat, or at least you think there is. It might be a trick of the light or a memory from another cafe, but you feel the faint brush of fur against your ankle, hear the barely there sound of a purr, and catch a flick of a tail before it vanishes behind the table leg. You do not investigate. To confirm the cat's existence would be to disturb the perfect uncertainty of it. Better to simply accept that you may or may not be sharing your seat with something feline and philosophical. This is the hour when the cafe seems to belong most to its quietest patrons. The ones with notebooks full of scribbles, pages dog-eared, and margins full of arrows and exclamation marks. The ones who order espresso not to drink it, but to have an excuse to sit with their thoughts. Writers, probably. Or at least people pretending to be writers, which is almost the same thing. One man has been working on the same sentence for over an hour. He writes it, frowns, scratches it out, rewrites it exactly the same way, and then underlines it twice for good measure. A woman in the corner is reading a book so intensely that she has not touched her tart, which now sits untouched, glistening slightly in the slanted light. It's easy to forget, in a place like this, how many things are being born silently. Not just stories or poems or manifestos, but small realizations, private discoveries, internal decisions. The cafe is full of beginnings disguised as afternoons. You might be sitting beside someone composing a symphony, or deciding to leave their job, or falling in love with the stranger at the next table just because of the way they stir their tea, and none of it makes a sound. The walls of the cafe have seen all this before. They are not clean. They are not symmetrical. They have been repainted and touched up and patched in ways that never quite match. There's a long crack above the coat rack that looks like a lightning bolt frozen in plaster, a stain beneath the window where someone once dropped an entire bottle of wine and laughed so hard they forgot to apologise. But then there is the art, if it can be called that. Some of it is framed, cheap prints of pastoral scenes, a charcoal sketch of a man whose expression suggests he's just been told something deeply offensive about soup. But most of it is less formal, painted directly onto the wall by past patrons, or perhaps by the owner himself during slow evenings. One corner is covered in ivy leaves, painted in faded green. Another features a lopsided moon with a face that looks suspiciously like the waiter. A mural behind the counter shows a horse drinking from a fountain shaped like a fish, though no one knows why. Peeling paint reveals older layers beneath, ghost colours, half-erased attempts at beauty, and yet, despite the chaos of style and subject, the effect is oddly moving. It's not a gallery, it's a record of all the ways people have tried to leave something behind. You're watching the light slide slowly down the wall when the door opens with the faintest chime. A child enters, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with curls that haven't decided what direction to grow in, and boots that are 2 sizes too big. She doesn't speak. She walks carefully through the cafe, weaving between tables, and settles near the hearth on a small stool that looks like it was made for just this purpose. From her coat pocket, she draws out a tiny music box. It's metal and shaped like a tin biscuit box, edges worn smooth with time. She winds it once, then twice, and opens the lid. The tune that spills out is delicate. A waltz, you think, or maybe a lullaby. It's slow, chiming, slightly off-key in places, but mesmerising. The cafe stills again, not abruptly, not as though silenced, but as though every person in the room remembered, all at once, how to be quiet. The sound is not loud, it doesn't demand attention, but it gathers it. People lower their books, their cups, their pens. One of the women knitting drops a stitch and doesn't even notice. Even the waiter pauses mid-step, holding a plate in one hand and a napkin in the other. The music curls around the tables like steam from a teacup, soft and strange, and profoundly gentle. When it ends, a final note that fades like breath on glass. No one claps, no one speaks. The child closes the lid, tucks the music box back into her pocket, and returns to her mother near the door. They leave without a word, and the cafe exhales once more. It takes a moment for the room to return to itself. A fork is lifted, a page is turned, a conversation resumes mid-sentence, as though nothing had happened. But something has. The afternoon feels slightly rearranged, as if all the particles in the air were gently stirred and then set down in a more harmonious order. You stretch slowly, not out of tiredness, but as a way of acknowledging the way time has passed without your permission. Your legs are warm, your fingers a little stiff. The cat, real or imagined, is no longer beneath your chair. The light has tilted further now, and the golden hue has deepened into amber, casting long shadows across the floor. A man begins drawing the window pane again, this time capturing the way the condensation has traced long trails down the glass, like rivers on a map. You glance at your cup. It's empty, though you don't remember finishing it. A breadcrumb rests on your saucer, the last survivor of the bread basket. You consider ordering another drink, but the thought of disturbing the delicate quiet with such a loud decision feels almost criminal. Better to sit a little longer and let the hour breathe. Outside, the shadows stretch across the pavement, and the city seems to tip slightly into evening, but not yet, not fully. Inside, the cafe still holds the warmth of earlier hours, like a pocket of slow-moving air that refuses to be rushed. By late afternoon, the cafe changes again, not drastically, but distinctly. The soft dream of the early hours gives way to something more grounded, more habitual. The light outside cools to a dull grey blue, and the streets begin to fill with footsteps that have somewhere to be. But inside, the cafe becomes a kind of in-between space where time still moves differently. It isn't sleepy now, nor lively. It's simply settled, like the surface of a pond after someone has skipped a stone across it. New faces begin to filter in, not hurried exactly, but purposeful. 2 postal clerks in stiff collars sit down by the window, brushing crumbs from the table, as if preparing it for official business. One wears a watch pinned to his vest and checks it at regular intervals, though he never seems surprised by what it tells him. The other loosens his boots and sighs in relief, the way someone might after returning home. Their conversation is mostly nods and grunts and the occasional pointed complaint about stamps. Nearby, a trio of students collapse into a booth, their jackets mismatched and patched at the elbows, their fingers stained with ink or charcoal or something more mysterious. One of them immediately asks for the cheapest thing on the menu. Another demands a coffee with a shot of something brave in it. The third unwraps a sandwich from their coat pocket and eats it furtively, as if trying to avoid arrest. They argue about literature for exactly 7 minutes before forgetting what the argument was and beginning to play cards instead. In the back corner, an older couple arrives and chooses the same table they always do, the small one near the lamp with the crooked shade. They don't speak much, or at all really. They remove their gloves with practiced ease, order 2 cups of black tea, and then sit with their hands folded together under the table, fingers loosely intertwined like a pair of vines that have grown used to one another's shape. Occasionally, one of them nods or raises an eyebrow, and the other responds with a subtle movement, a twitch of the mouth, a barely there squeeze. You get the sense that their conversations are too old for words. By now, the card players have taken over the central tables, not aggressively, just by gravitational pull. Someone produces a deck with rounded edges and fading illustrations. Another spreads out a worn cloth square and begins arranging dominoes with the deliberation of a man conducting a séance. The games begin without fanfare. There are no shouted bets or high drama, just quiet shuffles, occasional murmurs, the tapping of tiles and the occasional chuckle of someone pretending not to take it seriously. The rules, if they ever existed in writing, have long since been replaced by tradition and eye contact. Watching them, you begin to understand that the cafe has become something more than a place to sit or eat or think. It's a village, a drifting, shifting, portable little village with its own seasons, customs, and citizens. Here, you don't need to explain yourself. You can be known only by the way you hold a cup, or cut your bread, or nod at someone when they sneeze. You can be silent for hours, and still be included, still be felt. Everyone here has come from somewhere, from shops, from offices, from the smudged outer world, but once they pass through the cafe's door, those other lives soften into background noise. A pair of children run in and are promptly redirected by the waiter with a stern look and a surprisingly graceful gesture that involves both arms and a raised eyebrow. They vanish again into the street, giggling, leaving behind a faint scent of jam and mischief. A man with a cane and a limp arrives with a newspaper under one arm and a plum in his coat pocket. He reads only the classifieds, nods at the couple in the corner, and then proceeds to fall asleep over his tea. No one wakes him. The air grows heavier but not unpleasant. It is the weight of a place that has absorbed too many stories to ever feel light again. The smell of the day lingers, roasted beans, wine-soaked napkins, chalk dust from the students' coats, and the elusive trace of something floral, perhaps someone's perfume, or perhaps a vase that held flowers last week. The light from the lamps overhead grows more important now, painting small circles of brightness onto the tables like halos for humble things. A fork, a sugar packet, a smudged pair of reading glasses. And then just as someone is about to declare victory in a game whose objective no one else has fully understood, the door opens and a stranger enters. They are wrapped in a long coat, dark at the collar from rain or travel, and they walk with the kind of posture that suggests they don't plan to stay long. Their face is difficult to place. Not quite young, not quite old, not quite curious, not quite closed. They move directly to the counter, say something quietly to the owner, press a coin into his hand, and then, just as quietly, leave. There's a pause. The cafe registers the moment but doesn't react to it, not yet. The owner disappears into the back for a moment, and returns with a tray full of cups. Coffee, tea, a few small pastries, balanced with practiced grace. He begins distributing them, one by one, to each table. When someone asks what's going on, he shrugs and says, "It's taken care of." Another asks who the person was. He shrugs again. "Someone kind." No one questions it after that. People accept the gift the way one might accept a sudden breeze in summer, with gratitude, with surprise, and without needing to understand where it came from. The students raise their cups in a mock toast. The card players nod solemnly, as if this is a strategy they respect. The elderly couple share a look that says something between "people are good" and "what a strange, beautiful place this is." For a while, conversation drops again. Not completely, but just enough for the clinking of porcelain and the soft clearing of throats to become the dominant sound. You sip your own coffee, freshly poured, and feel the warmth settle in your chest. The taste is simple, the kind that doesn't try to impress, just to comfort. The kind of taste that reminds you you're still here, and so is everyone else. You glance at the clock, which has resumed its leisurely ticking, still 5 minutes off from the rest of the world. The light outside has grown thinner now, almost brittle at the edges, like paper held up to a flame. The pigeons on the windowsill fluff themselves against the chill, and someone in the back begins folding napkins with careful precision, as though practicing origami for an audience that may never arrive. The cafe does not rush toward evening. It eases into it, like a boat gliding into a wide, still lake. The card games wind down, their scores never fully tallied. A few people begin to gather their coats, gently, with the kind of reluctant grace that belongs to those who know they must leave, but aren't quite ready to re-enter the noise outside. Someone adjusts a scarf, someone else reaches for their cane and pats the shoulder of the student still scribbling furiously into a notebook. The couple in the corner hasn't moved. Their hands are still folded together, steady and warm. This is the quiet hour before dinner, before decisions, before real movement returns. A pause in the day, extended just long enough to feel like a gift. You sit back, wrap your hands around your cup, and watch the last of the cards being shuffled into a neat stack, their worn backs catching the lamplight like tiny, well-used mirrors. Dusk arrives gradually, as though reluctant to disturb what's already in progress. There's no dramatic shift, no sudden dimming, just the slow elongation of shadows across the floorboards, the way lamplight begins to matter more than sunlight, and the faint cooling of the cafe's windows as the day exhales its last warmth. The gas lamps along the street sputter to life, one by one, each with its own small hiss, and inside the cafe, the bulbs flicker once, then steady, into an amber glow that softens every edge. The light here is golden now. Not bright, not bold, just enough to make the room feel like it's been wrapped in old velvet. The cafe has grown quieter again, but not like before. The hush of dusk is different from the hush of afternoon. It's heavier, not with sorrow, but with weight. The weight of people returning from somewhere else. You can feel the shift in the air as workers come in, their coats dusted with the day's labour, their collars askew, their footsteps slower. They don't rush to find seats. They move with the tired precision of people who've walked the same path many times. They nod at the regulars, nod at the owner, nod at their own fatigue. Some speak, some don't. Either way, they're understood. A man sits down near the stove and peels off his gloves, finger by finger. Beside him, a woman removes a handkerchief from her sleeve and dabs her temples, though it's not warm anymore. A delivery boy collapses into a chair and orders bread with butter and nothing else. He eats like someone trying to rebuild his face, one bite at a time. No one rushes him. He is given space and warmth and the occasional glance from those who have been him before. The games of cards have ended. The students have vanished, likely to somewhere with more noise or more adventure, or both. In their place are men and women with ink on their sleeves and sore knees, who speak softly and only when necessary. They sip coffee with both hands. They hold their utensils carefully, as though the weight of a fork might tip the balance of the day. The air inside is warmer than outside, but not by much. Still, it feels like refuge, not escape exactly. Just a place where the day can be set down for a while without shattering. Someone near the back unfolds a letter with the cautious reverence of someone handling a rare and possibly unstable artifact. It's creased, hand-addressed in looping blue ink, and slightly smudged where it was caught in the rain. He clears his throat and announces, more to the table than to the room, that the letter is from his cousin in Marseille. This declaration does not stop the café entirely, but it causes enough of a pause that a few heads turn toward him in polite anticipation. The letter, as it turns out, is not full of news. Or rather, it is full of exactly the kind of news one hopes to receive from a cousin in Marseille. It details, in winding and oddly poetic prose, the saga of a goose that got loose in a bakery, a particularly determined goose apparently, with a fondness for rye and a vendetta against a rolling pin. The cousin describes the event in glorious detail, the honking, the flapping, the flour that coated everything in a ghostly haze, the poor baker's attempt to restore order with nothing but a baguette and a prayer. By the end of the letter, a small crowd has gathered around the reader's table, not closely, but near enough to share in the laughter that rises in soft waves. Someone raises their glass. Someone else wipes their eye with the corner of a sleeve. It isn't the story itself that matters, but the sound of it, the rhythm of words shared aloud, the joy of something absurd arriving from far away. The reader folds the letter slowly when he finishes and places it in his coat pocket like a treasure, too fragile for the world. Not long after, the scent of something new begins to drift through the café, something warm, sharp, and oddly festive. At first it's just a hint, then it grows, curling into every corner, like a familiar song you haven't heard in years. Someone has ordered mulled wine, not the sweet kind served at fairs, but the proper kind, slow heated with orange peel, clove, and cinnamon bark. It arrives in a simple ceramic mug, the steam catching in the lamplight. The person who ordered it doesn't say anything. They just cradle it between both hands and hold it close to their face, eyes closed, as if breathing it in could undo whatever the day has done. The smell changes the room, not dramatically. There's no applause, no announcement, but perceptibly. The cafe feels warmer now, not just in temperature, but in mood. A man by the window loosens his scarf. A woman resting her chin on her hand lifts her head just slightly. Even the waiter seems to soften his usually impeccable posture. For a brief moment, the air feels like a coat being wrapped around your shoulders by someone who knows you well. Not grand, just kind. You inhale deeply, and the scent settles into you like a memory you haven't lived yet. Orange, clove, wood smoke, and a touch of something bittersweet. It doesn't make you forget the outside world, only reminds you that there are moments within it worth holding on to. The cafe, in this hour, is full of such moments. Small ones, quiet ones, a shrug, a nod, a flicker of a smile between two people who haven't spoken all day. The windows are fogged again, but no one bothers to wipe them down. The world outside has grown dark, and the reflections now belong entirely to the interior. The curve of a hand lifting a glass, the glint of a spoon stirred absent-mindedly, the flicker of the lamps mirrored twice over in glass and shadow. You see yourself just faintly, seated in your chair, not perfectly upright, not perfectly composed, but exactly as you are, present, unhurried, dusted with lamplight. Somewhere in the back, the fireplace lets out a slow creak, like an old violin tuning itself. The heat it gives off is inconsistent, but no one complains. A few people have moved closer to it, their chairs angled toward the glow. A scarf is draped over one leg of the mantel like a sleeping cat. Someone plays with the ends of their gloves while their tea cools. No one rushes to finish anything. The clock ticks on, slower than usual, or maybe you're simply hearing it more clearly now. Dusk is over, technically. It is night now, but no one seems eager to name it. The cafe holds onto the edge of evening, like a child refusing to go to bed. The shadows have stopped growing. They've taken their places and wait quietly in the corners, respectful of the mood. The lamplight doesn't flicker anymore. It glows steadily, generously, casting everything in that same shade of forgiving gold. You sit a little deeper in your chair. Your hands are warm. Your eyes are soft. Around you, people begin their evening rituals, folding napkins, checking watches they don't believe, finishing final pages of books that were never meant to be finished today. The cafe breathes with them, expanding and settling like lungs at rest. Night arrives, not with a bang, but with a soft invitation. The street outside fades into a dark mirror, and the cafe, so long defined by the play of natural light, begins to glow from within. Candles are lit, not because the gas lamps have failed, but because the hour calls for them. Their flames dance gently atop brass holders and cracked porcelain saucers, casting warm halos across the tables. The shadows inside grow shorter, even as the ones outside lengthen and vanish. The cafe becomes its own moon, floating in the dark. The tone shifts too, not dramatically, not all at once, but perceptibly. The laughter becomes quieter, more knowing. The conversations slow and lean in closer. Chairs are tucked just a bit nearer the table. Scarves are wrapped again around shoulders, not because of the cold, but because the night is allowed to carry its own weight. The cafe, once a refuge from the outside world, now feels like a secret that the city has forgotten to claim. Someone takes out a violin. It isn't a performance, not officially. There's no announcement, no clearing of the throat. The player, a young man with his collar turned up and his bow tie askew, draws the instrument from a case as casually as one might take out a book. He tightens the bow with a practiced hand, rests the violin under his chin, and begins to play. Not loudly, not showily, but tenderly. The first few notes are uncertain, like footsteps in a strange house, but then the melody finds its legs and begins to walk. The music isn't famous, it isn't particularly precise. There are moments where the pitch wobbles and the rhythm sways, but none of that matters. It drifts through the cafe like candle smoke, curling into every corner and finding every ear. The players at the card tables pause. The waiter, mid-pour, slows his motion to keep time. Even the couple in the corner, the same two who always hold hands under the table, turn toward the sound and smile faintly, as if remembering something only they knew. At a nearby table, two lovers argue in whispers. It is not the kind of argument that seeks victory, but the kind that's full of tired affection and unfinished stories. Their gestures are small, restrained. A flick of a hand, a narrowing of the eyes, the subtle arch of an eyebrow that says, yes, I remember that night too. They aren't performing for anyone. If anything, they've forgotten the room exists. But every now and then, they fall silent for a moment when the music lifts. The sound's stronger than their quarrel, if only for a note or two. The waiter, now moving more slowly, begins to philosophize aloud. Not in long speeches, but in fragments, muttered to himself or to anyone who might be listening. He speaks of the moon, of how onions taste different depending on the weather, of a childhood friend who used to steal apples and give them back. He wipes a glass that's already clean and places it exactly where it was before. No one interrupts him. His thoughts are part of the room now, part of the evening's spell. The candlelight makes his face look older, or maybe wiser. The cafe has taken on its evening form, something altogether different from its daytime self. Gone is the bustle of morning spoons and lunchtime theatrics. Now there are corners of silence. Now there are secrets, People sit closer. Some write with greater intensity, their pens scratching quickly across paper, as if the night might vanish too soon. Others simply sit with their cups, turning them gently in their hands, lost in whatever the dark brings up from the bottom of their thoughts. You watch all of this from your place near the wall, your second cup of coffee now half gone. You had considered ordering wine, but something about the way the coffee clings to its heat, the way the porcelain holds the lamp's glow, feels right for this hour. The world outside is nearly invisible now, save for the occasional passing carriage and the flicker of gaslight on rain-slick cobblestones. Inside, you are not alone, but you are not required, and that somehow is more comforting than company. It's easy to forget, in an age with so many ways to be seen, how much meaning there is in being quietly present. The cafe offers that, the sense that your being here matters not because you're remarkable, but because you're part of the story. Not the main character, not even a named role. Just someone sitting near the back with a warm drink and a tired gaze. Just someone whose presence adds another ripple to the room's quiet pool. There's a reason cafes in Paris became salons of a sort, even for those who never published a single page. They were more than places to meet. They were extensions of thought, shared spaces where ideas didn't have to be good or even finished to matter. A cafe like this absorbs them all. The grand theories scribbled onto napkins, the small truths whispered between mouthfuls of stew, the half-finished poems tucked into coat pockets, the silent declarations made by the way someone stares out a window for too long. You think of all the ideas that must have passed through this place, the inventions dreamed up and forgotten, the stories told, the ones interrupted, the ones never begun. Somewhere beneath the worn tile floors and the stained tabletops, there's probably a residue of them, layered like dust, fragile and invisible. You wonder if the room remembers them in its own way, if the wood holds echoes, if the air itself has been changed by what it's heard. And then, in the middle of this gentle web of thought and sound, something extraordinary happens. A woman stands slowly, from a table near the back. She is older, wearing a shawl that shimmers just slightly in the candlelight, and her voice, when it comes, is low and clear. She begins to sing. Not in French, not in anything most people would recognize right away, but in Occitan, that soft, lilting language that once wound through the hills of the south like a forgotten breeze. The song is a lullaby. You don't need to understand the words to know that. Her voice fills the space not with power, but with closeness. Each note seems to touch the furniture, the walls, the hands of the people listening. It's a melody shaped like a cradle, like a mother's hand brushing hair from a forehead, like the warmth of a blanket still holding someone's scent. People don't speak, they don't move. Even the violinist, perhaps sensing that his part in this moment has passed, lowers his bow and listens. When she finishes, there is no applause, just the kind of stillness that holds everything gently in place for a few seconds longer than it should. Then the world resume. A spoon clinks, a chair creaks, a match is struck to relight a candle, but something remains. The room feels smaller, closer, as if everyone has been brought just a little nearer to one another without anyone realizing it. You close your eyes and breathe in. The air smells of wax and coffee, and orange rind. The night has deepened, and the room, for all its shadows, seems to glow from the inside out. The cafe is no longer just a place. It's a moment. Whole, unbroken, complete. Eventually, even a place like this must close. Not abruptly, and not all at once. The cafe would never stoop to something so rude. Instead, the ending comes slowly, folded into familiar motions and soft sounds. Chairs begin to scrape gently as people stretch, gather their scarves, and button their coats with the deliberate grace of those who have nowhere urgent to be. The waiter hums again, this time a tune with no rhythm and less melody than before. He stacks plates, wipes down counters, and begins the nightly ritual of restoring order to the small and holy mess that accumulated over the past 15 hours. Crumbs are swept from tabletops with a rag that's seen generations of crumbs before. Salt is returned to its tin. A half-eaten tart is wrapped in brown paper and placed behind the counter. Not because anyone asked, but because someone might. Candle wicks are pinched gently between fingers. The glow recedes, not in a blink, but like fog melting into night air. The shadows shift, then dissolve into their corners again. What little remains of the violin music of the lullaby in Occitan drifts upward and disappears somewhere near the rafters, where it will sleep until called again. Near the door, someone winds their scarf once more around their throat and taps the heel of their boot against the threshold. A small gesture, unconscious, but full of goodbye. A man returns his borrowed newspaper to the basket near the stove, carefully smoothing out the fold as if it matters to someone. And, in a way, it does. Every gesture in this cafe means something, however small. You begin to understand that now, as the minutes unwind toward departure. Nothing here was wasted, not time, not thought, not a single breath. And then, as if summoned by the quiet, the goose returns. You almost forgot about her, that strange little sentinel of the street. She stands just outside the open door, perfectly centered, perfectly still. Her white feathers glow faintly in the lamplight, and her eyes hold the same solemn, unbothered judgment as they did this morning. She doesn't honk. She doesn't enter. She simply is. As if to say, that's enough now. The day has been plenty. Go home, rest. People pass by her without alarm. A few tip their hats. One offers a piece of crust which she considers and then ignores. The owner of the cafe notices her too, but doesn't react. It's all part of the evening routine. Chairs are stacked, slowly, respectfully, never with noise, never with haste. They rest upside down on tables like sleeping insects, their legs folded in prayer. You remain in your seat a few moments longer, reluctant to disturb the stillness, as if standing might unmake the day. But eventually you do rise. Your coat, when you slip it on, is warm from the back of the chair and smells unmistakably of coffee, bread, and the faintest trace of orange peel. You button it with fingers that have gone soft and loose from so much stillness. The floor creaks once under your step, a final goodbye from the wood that held you for so long. No one rushes you, no one watches, and yet you feel the cafe seeing you off just the same, with the hush of the air, the flicker of the light, the ghost of a tune that's already finished playing. Outside, the street is colder than you remembered. The night has fully fallen, wrapping the world in quiet layers of shadow and breath. The stones beneath your feet are slick with mist. Somewhere far off, a carriage rolls past, its wheels hissing over wet ground. But for now, the street is mostly empty, save for you and the goose, who has now turned her back and begun walking, slow and dignified, toward wherever geese go when the world goes dim. You take a few steps into the street, but then you pause. Something pulls you to turn around, not dramatically, not out of suspicion or fear, just a gentle tug of the heart asking for one last look. And so you do. You glance back at the cafe through its front window, which is still glowing softly, though the lights have dimmed and the reflections now do most of the work. And there, in the faint fogged glass, you see yourself. You're still sitting at the table, just for a second, just a glimpse, a flicker of your posture, the curve of your shoulder, the ghost of your own attention turned inward. Your coat is off, your cup is full again, your gaze is tilted slightly downward, as though lost in thought. You blink, and the image is gone, replaced by the waiter stacking cups, by shadows, by candlelight. But the after-image lingers in your mind. You feel, perhaps, that part of you is still in there, not metaphorically, not poetically, actually. As though the part of you that sat so still so long decided to stay. You turn back to the street, your feet crunching lightly on gravel now cold and fragrant with rain. The cold doesn't bite exactly. It brushes, it reminds. You're back in the world that moves at ordinary speed, where people walk quickly and windows are dark and thoughts get interrupted. But you are not the same as when you entered. The day has changed you in ways too subtle to name. You carry something now, not just the scent on your coat or the warmth in your hands, but the shape of the day itself, folded carefully, like a letter in your chest pocket. As you walk away from the cafe, the sounds of the city return, bit by bit. The bark of a dog, a laugh around the corner, the creak of a shutter closing above your head. But even as those sounds build around you, they do not crowd you. There is still space, still quiet. The cafe has given you that, a kind of buffer against the noise, a moment so long and gentle, it stretches behind you like a soft wake through water. You know you'll come back. Not necessarily tomorrow, not even next week, but one day. And when you do, the cafe will still be there, changed perhaps in the way that anything living always changes, but also the same in all the ways that matter. The chairs will still creak. The butter will still be just slightly too salty. The sugar bowl will still contain more spoons than seems reasonable. And maybe, if you're lucky, the goose will still be standing in the doorway, waiting to let you know when it's time to call it a day. And until then, you'll carry it with you. In your stride, in the way you sip your coffee, in the moments you remember to pause between things. You'll think of someone playing a violin by candlelight, of a poem whispered to a sugar cube, of a lullaby in a language you didn't understand but still felt like home. And you, lucky you, were there for all of it. Beginning to end, light to dark, cup to cup. That brings us to the end of today's quiet journey. Not a tale of triumph or tragedy, but of small rituals, warm cups, and the kind of stillness that lingers long after the last candle burns low. If you're somehow still awake, thank you for spending the day with me in that soft corner of Paris where time drifts, geese wander, and nothing much happens, except perhaps everything. If you'd like early access to more slow hours and gently lit stories from history, along with perks like ad-free audio of these episodes, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment letting me know what quiet chapter of the past you'd like to visit next. And if you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find their way to these stories. Sleep well.